Alright, today I'd like to talk a little bit about the state of Honkai Star Rail and basically how we got to where we're at in terms of how different parts of the community are perceiving the game. This is something I've kind of been thinking about for a while now, so I figured it'd be a neat point of discussion. What really got me thinking about this was my lack of desire to play through the 3.1 story. For the record, I did actually play through and finish that story just a few nights ago, basically just under a week before the next story drops in 3.2. For some of you, that might seem normal. Like, I know I have friends that put off doing stuff until the last moment possible, but for me, it's generally the opposite. Like, I've always been someone that plays through the story when it drops, partially because I don't want to be spoiled, but also because I'm genuinely interested in seeing where the story goes and then what happens during it. But after 3.0, going into 3.1, that desire just wasn't really there. While I logged in and I did the events and I kept clearing endgame when the resets happened, I didn't really ever want to sit down and play through the new real content that the game had. That said, after finally playing through it the other night, I kinda just sat with it for a moment and tried to figure out what was my logic for putting it off for so long. Like, was I worried about the 10 hours that it would have taken me to play through it? I mean, no, I actually don't have a problem with stories being long as long as there are decent parts that I can stop throughout it. Was it because I wasn't interested in the HSR story anymore? I mean, definitely not. I'd actually say I'm still pretty interested in seeing what happens in the story and where it goes. Maybe it was because the characters weren't interesting to me? I mean, also no, because I actually like most of them that were a part of it. So, what is it then? Well, honestly, my conclusion was that all this really comes down to is the state of the game that is surrounding the story. Something that's really important to realize with this kind of stuff is that how the game is going will shape the way that people are feeling about it. And that's kind of like a duh moment, but I want to point it out here because it's so relevant in this case. Like, I think it's pretty undeniable that there's been some problems with the game recently. For the past, I would say, like 6 months or so, power creep and HP inflation have been on people's minds. There's been countless videos and discussion about this topic, yet from the actual company until recently we didn't actually have any news as to how this may improve going forward. We did finally get info about buffs coming back in February, but they're not coming for a long time, and they're also only for a small group of characters. I'd also say the story was something that people were concerned about. There were some complaints about the story itself, but definitely a lot more about the presentation of the story. For example, we had complaints about the black screen white text stuff for a long time. We've had complaints that the characters didn't have enough animations, and we also had complaints about the pacing of the story and how most of the puzzles in it are seemingly there to pad time rather than being meaningful content. Personally, I think a pretty egregious example of this is how the early 3.1 story at the Grove followed the exact same story beats that we just played back in 3.0. The god of the area gave us trials, being Nikador in 3.0 and Circes in 3.1, and only after completing those random trials could we move forward again. While there were improvements to the story mentioned back in that special edition developer radio in 3.0, at the time of writing this script we haven't seen anything super concrete in game yet in terms of changes, though hopefully in 3.2 that'll improve. There were also some complaints about there not being enough content in the game apart from the story to do. For example, the in-game rotations happen at a super slow pace even when compared to Hoyo's other games like ZZZ, where it feels like you always have endgame to do. And on top of that, it feels like each patch has less and less effort put into the different events that people can mess around in, like with the different mini-games, and that's not even mentioning the lack of things to actually use the characters we collect in, like combat events. Both of those things are problems that we still haven't gotten any news on. That might seem like a lot, but this is all important to note here because these are all things that people could potentially be unhappy with. Like, maybe power creep doesn't matter to you. Well, what about the lack of events? Maybe you don't care about events. Okay, then what about the presentation of the story? What if you don't care about the story and you wouldn't just play your older characters? Are you able to do that? No matter what part of the game you look at, there's stuff that isn't good, even if you like the other parts of it. In my personal case, I'm actually enjoying the story for the most part, but what I'm not enjoying is the fact that I need stupid amounts of investments to actually use my old favorite characters. So that's how the game is now. But if you go back and look at how the community was at the first anniversary, it was vastly different. We were coming off of the high of the free Doctor Ratio and Genshin Could Never. We previously had really good events like Ethereum Wars and the Ghost Hunting event. We were also still at the beginning of peak Akoni, with new hype characters like Sparkle with her banger trailer, Black Swan releasing to finally pair with a fan favorite character in Kafka, as well as Akron, who was not only teased months in advance back at the Game Awards, but who's also the May XP from the previous games. The story had better pacing too. For example, any puzzles we had, like the rooms where you walked on walls, were there to get you from point A to point B to continue the story, whereas in 3.x the puzzles were there to pad time like I said earlier. On top of that, it felt like the devs were listening to the players. We were getting one quality update after another, and all of the characters across all their various plot lines really gave us a lot to think about, especially the characters that we didn't really expect a lot from. Like, be honest for a moment here, going into 2.0, did you ever think a character like Adventurine would get as much development as he did, with his entire backstory essentially playing out over the 2.1 patch? What about Firefly and how she basically became the community's collective anime girlfriend overnight once 2.x launched? These were new characters that had insane amounts of development over a short period of time that quickly became new fan favorites. There was also a ton of stuff that Hoyo was doing for HSR outside of the game, but it all directly related to what was going on in it. For example, everything that came with Robin, with the big concerts and an entire album created for her that the community could get behind. Like, looking back on it, all of it was actually pretty crazy. The perception of the game was in a wildly different spot because the game was actually producing content that people were pretty happy with overall. Like, when a game's atmosphere is good and it's fun to engage with it, the players are happy and the perception improves. On the other hand, when you have a stagnant game and there's very little to be excited about, you get to the point where we're at now. You might be seeing where I'm going with all this, but to spell it out, basically everything that was going on back then felt like big hitters one after the other in comparison to how things are now, where everything feels slow and low effort. Everything the community has seemingly wanted to happen since that period of time is either coming way down the line or is on the back burner in terms of release schedule. And that's okay, right? Like, at least we know it's coming and stuff, but in the meantime, it makes people feel like HSR really isn't the big dog for Hoyo anymore, or in other words, that the game isn't Hoyo's focus at all. If it was, we'd probably have a better timeline for this stuff, or more content to play, or whatever else, but instead it's either being put into marketing, or more likely, Hoyo's other games. I've talked about the Hoyoverse ecosystem before, and I think that's really relevant here. Like, if Hoyo wanted to, HSR could be the best game on the market, but they don't want it to be because they have other games they want you to play, other games they want to develop, and also they have a player base big enough that they can do less work on HSR and still have people play it despite the lack of content the game may have. And to connect this all back to my original point where I was just simply wondering why wasn't I super interested in the 3.1 story, it's because of all these issues and differences between how the game used to be and how it is now. Like, it's genuinely harder to enjoy something when it's surrounded by a plethora of problems that aren't being addressed by the people that made those problems. Like, let me give you a real life example. You could be at a restaurant with the best food on the planet, but if the restaurant smells awful and the service from the staff is terrible and you have to sit on a rickety old chair without a table in front of you, are you really going to be going to that restaurant super often? And honestly, I don't really think so, because despite the food being good, the overall experience is bad. This is the same with HSR at the moment. The story presentation isn't great, the power creep that doesn't allow me to use my characters sucks, the lack of content that doesn't give me anything to do isn't fun. So even though I enjoy the actual story itself and I love the characters in the game, and when there's content to play, I enjoy that too, but it just doesn't end up mattering because the experience overall isn't amazing, right? Like, if the company seems to care about the game less now compared to how much they seem to care back in the early Penacony era, then that directly affects how much players like me will enjoy the game. And what I feel all this has been doing as a result is not only making me less interested in the story aspects of the game, but honestly just the game as a whole. It really doesn't feel like Hoyo is putting as much effort into the game as they used to, and that feels frustrating as a player because at the end of the day, I'm just a gamer and all I want to do is play the game. But instead, what I feel is happening is that Hoyo is eroding the trust and the goodwill that players have in them. It basically feels like they've been riding the high of Penacony for so long at this point that for some reason they don't see that people just want more, and what we're currently getting isn't enough to outweigh the problems the game has. And to be clear, I do realize that this may just be me looking back on the era of the game with rose-tinted glasses and nostalgia, but nostalgia doesn't come from nowhere. Like, if I didn't enjoy the game back then, I wouldn't care about how much effort there was from Hoyo in comparison to now, but I do. I miss when it felt like Hoyo was putting in their top effort, because when they do, they make banger products that pretty much everyone is happy with. And on the other hand, when they don't, you get the current state of HSR where people don't want to play the story, and they don't want to pull all the new characters, and they don't want to deal with the problems the game has anymore. Like, when you reach a point where you've burnt through the goodwill your players have for the game, that's when you should be thinking, okay, it's time to kick it into high gear and get that goodwill back. But to me, it just doesn't feel like Hoyo is doing that. That's just how I'm feeling about it though, so I'd love to hear how you feel about this, so feel free to comment down below or join my Discord link in the description to talk with me about it. Anyway, as always, thank you very much for watching, subscribe, and if you haven't already, maybe give my other videos a shot too.